Okay, so we tied this last jig that was the bunny jig, which was won the the Flathead Masters, that premier Flathead competition in the Swan River in 2002. We were saying that bunny. I was saying that rabbit is very resilient and resistant to blowies, and that's what we need with jigs, etc. What I've done here is I've just grabbed a jig. I hadn't been to the tackle shop or anything, and this one's a 2.0, which is great. It's a 1/4. It's going to be good for distance, flounder, flathead, and they're not as fussy as what brim are with jig heads. Within reason, they'll manage a bit of a bump, and we were talking about the sand coming up when it hits the ground, and that gets their attention. So this will probably get a little bit more distance. So I'm just going to tie this very quickly for you, so that you can you might want to have a crack yourself. You don't need fancy vices. You can get cheap ones. Okay, so just wrap this back up here, I think. All right, so I'm just going to put this bit of sparkle on here. This just represents, probably a bit of white bait. White baits, all these other species, they're trying to be invisible. So they try and, the reflection blends them in regards to light with the bottom and that sort of thing. But they spin over on their side in the darkness, and they give the game away a little bit. And the fish are attracted to this silver and the body and that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be fancy. You don't need super fancy with flathead and flounder. They see this stuff, they're coming, and you want something that is resilient to blowies, and it's an affordable loss if you get it stuck. Fishing bibbed minnows and they get caught in the rocks, $30 or something, or then it hurts a bit more. Okay, so I'll just wrap this back one last time. I'm trying to talk and chew gum here. You can use this around in UV light at night time. They'll feed at night time. My first fish I ever caught was a flathead at night time. When I was a little kid, and Dad and my grandfather and uncles would be dragging the drag net for prawns, and I just took a little one and Mozzie Bay jetty, and I've chucked it down, and I had this big thick fiberglass rod, and got a monster flathead at night off the Mozzie Bay jetty as a kid. And you can put luminescent stuff on, if you've got anything glow in the dark, put a little bit on. I mean, when you drag for prawns at night, you get bioluminescence comes down, it's little green bubbles, and so what we do is you lining this up. We don't want it too long, but because I've got these stupid glasses on to get your attention, I can't see properly. And I've done something else with the other ones. Never mind, I'll do without. Yeah, so you get bioluminescence. I remember dragging the net with Dad and whatever, and you run your hand through the water, and the bubbles were just bright chartreuse green from all those nutrients come down. And, I'd say, "Oh, Dad, what's this?" And he goes, "Well, that's phosphorus." And I think not even inshore myself in its entirety. But he's probably lending to the fact that the fertilizer that makes its way into the river actually spawns things like dinoflagellates, that sort of thing. And once they're activated in the water, and the UV light also activates them, and you get these chartreuse bubbles. And what happens is the prawns and when you're king prawning in the tinny, you set up. Well, we used to use a primus. Now they've got all these fancy underwater lights, etc., all LED, and different world today. But you set up your boat and you light the primus, and all of a sudden the prawns start coming down, and their eyes glow red. You get the green bubbles that build up on their bodies, on the crabs and everything. And when you're in the boat scooping for prawns, it's, I'm not a massive fan of crayfishing. But king prawning, I like doing that in the boat and watching them come down, because you're just sitting there in the night and the peace, largely, well, more so in those days. And all these fish are coming down, and they got the green bubbles on them, and you're scooping them up, and you get to see a lot of things and a lot of fish that come down, and it's a different world. Garfish, crabs, the prawns, other species, and that chartreuse is, obviously when that aggregates as bubbles onto things like crabs and prawns, etc., predators, they can see all that. Fish can see much higher into the spectrum. They can see into the high vis chartreuse spectrum. That chartreuse is a very narrow band of the spectrum. It's in the high end, so it tends to go deeper. But when water gets dirtier, then this is why you get Rayleigh scattering at sunset, and you only get the red left, because the red is like this, and it goes around the particles. And we might go into something a little bit different with that in a minute, about how predators start seeing grayscale. They'll convert from colour vision to grayscale before the bait fish, and that's why you get tailor feeding at sunset, etc. So the bioluminescence, put some glow stuff on your flathead jigs. They obviously feed at night. I mean, they'll use different sensors. I don't know how this massive flathead found the fresh prawn. It must have been purely maybe scent. I don't know. But the prawn was only about 5 minutes old, and so you will catch flathead at night, and probably with lures more so around bridges, etc. There's people like Robbie Madaffrey and Kimmy Meldrum will they use chartreuse clouses in the boat, and just sit there and roll cast chartreuse clouses at night from the dark into the light, or vice versa, and into the light and as it rolls down to the dark, and the mulloway is sitting there in the darkness, and they'll come out and smash all the things that are coming down, and that sort of ties in with the chartreuse bubbles attached to the fish coming out with the tide that are leaving the river, etc. And they're not moving. They're trying not to move, because as soon as they move, they create more bubbles, and they create vibrations, and all the predators, they utilize all those aspects. Remember, we spoke about in the other jig about puffs of sand, and how my grandfather, to catch whiting, was using a giant brick of lead. It was 12 ounce, and they would, they just get a wooden piece of wood and carve it out, pour the lead into the wood, and you end up with this giant slab of lead which stirred up the sand, etc. So, as a kid, I did a bit of fishing, and I'm a bit of an ADHD fisher, where, squirrel, but I'm over here, I'm over there, and I just love fishing. I just, it's awesome fun. and you can do it at your own leisure. And my vocation, you don't feel like playing footy or whatever. You know, you're pretty tired at the end of the week. But at any rate, so, you know, when I was a kid, I went fish off. I was going to go and catch a bream at 2 o'clock in the morning at Canning Bridge. And I had my chartreuse Mr. Twister, which tied in with what I'd seen. And I'm chucking it out. I'm up to my waist in freezing cold water with the mist coming off, chucking my overhead, little dyer overhead and the Mr. Twister. And I've hooked up to a massive mulloway under the light there on the chartreuse Mr. Twister, and the little dyer and the rod's just like this. You know, this is in the 80s. And off it's gone, and eventually the mulloway's just gone through the bridge and busted me off. I couldn't stop him on. I was fishing 4 kilo and 8 pound nylon, and the mulloway will run with the tide, and you know, as soon as you hook one, it mostly runs with the tide. So the biggest drama when you're hooking them is when you've got all these other obstacles around. But they love the bridges, and my grandfather, you know, I think I stated before, we fished in the 20s around Fremantle Traffic Bridge and stuff, and he'd go, Neil, we'd be sitting there with our square Kero tins with a live tailer underneath, and all you'd hear is boof, 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 as all the guardies and everything came down through the bridges. And that was probably one of the few sources of light in the 20s. And so the mulloway worked out that it was an easy feed. They fish just fly, so they're just sitting there flying in the water, just in the eddies. A lot of them are in the eddies. I remember king prawning at night as a young kid. Me and my old man built this little wooden dinghy, probably about 12 foot long, something like that, 4 horsepower, and you launched it under Stirling Bridge. You probably can't do that now. And go upstream, and sometimes the boat would just sit still because the 4 horsepower wasn't fast enough to get, to go forward in the current, so you'd have to row for a little bit. But I remember being anchored up there, and we were probably up around the water police. There was no water police when we went there. We were prawning, and they did eventually build a water police station there. And so we're fishing there, and I had this king prawn, and we had a bunch of king prawns. I thought I'll just put one on a hand line and chuck it over the side of the tinny, and it's flicking behind the dinghy, and I was getting tired. I was really young, and I started to sort of lean down on the edge of the dinghy and whatever, and being mindful that the hand line was out the back with the kingy flicking on it, and next minute this big silver flash just rolled underneath the boat and went through, and that was the mulloway. That was the first mulloway I ever saw, and you see some amazing. It's a different world at night when you're out in the river, and you're in there in the afternoon, you're chasing your flatheads and your flounders, but once you start getting out in a dinghy at night, this time of the year, mulloway they're in Mozzie Bay breeding, and when you'll anchor up in different areas. I won't go into too much, giving away everyone's secret spots, but when you're anchored, you can hear the mulloway. So you're sitting in your dinghy, you've got your little aluminium dinghy anchored up, and try and keep them as still as you can when you're fishing. People have taught me these things. And you'll start hearing the mulloway, and they'll be warp, warp. It sounds like they're right under your boat. And when they're really firing, all you're hearing is warp, warp. Sounds like you're, bunch of frogs, big, bullfrogs underneath the boat. And so it's a different world. UV, when I was a kid, I went to Roto, and there was a bloke, the skipper banged his head on the boat, and he swore, and you could see my mum wasn't overly happy, so we were sort of trying to appease the situation. And he goes, "Oh, well, you going fishing, are you, mate?" And I was a kid with me glass rod and whatever, and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to catch a mulloway." And he says, "Do you know that mulloway can see X-rays from the moon?" Now, you say that to someone like me as a kid, I start thinking about all these things. And, I've spoken to other people, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's just the tide." But I really think when you play back into the chartreuse bubbles and the activation, I saw in a documentary not long ago that a lot of these sharks can see by starlight. So they're using the light off the stars for their vision, and they see in grayscale. Taylor and these other species have colour vision by day, and they convert to grayscale, and they can see low light vision in grayscale, and they'll do that before sunset sort of thing, and they're converted before the baitfish, and that's how they ambush, and that's why we get a lot, tying back into that Rayleigh scattering with the sun and the red and the spectrum going like this. So that's why red quite often works well in dirty water, and chartreuse goes further in clear water because it's a tighter wave. So just to review very quickly, probably forgotten a few things, but don't be scared to use something Lumo. Have a crack at night for your flathead and your flounder, and what you'll notice is, like even the other night, this was sort of reinforced, with my, vicarious learning and observations, was that the flathead came right up against the wall, etc., at about 6:30. So they're right in front of your feet. They're right there, and so be observant and look at them, and that's it. That's, as in the night comes and the water's coming up, they'll move in close. So don't be scared to look right under your feet at night when the tide's coming up, and see if they're there. And that's a great thing about flathead fishing is it's you quite often you can get to sight fish, when you get to see them, and sight fishing's fun. It's great fun. It's like that trout fishing in the UK, in the when you're fishing those water bodies, the reservoirs. It's like, sometimes it's like golf courses, but it's fun. Fishing's fun. Love it. Thank you for listening.